Dr. Mohan, thank you so much for joining us on Value for Money. For our audience, Dr. Rakesh Mohan is President and Distinguished Fellow at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, CSEP, New Delhi, formerly Brookings, India. He has held some of the most influential roles in the Indian economic policy. He was the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Executive Director at the IMF, Secretary of Economic Affairs and Chief Economic Advisor to the Ministry of Finance. He's authored several books, including Monetary Policy in a Globalized Economy and the edited volume, India Transformed 25 Years of Economic Reforms. Our viewers, Dr. Mohan, are not macro specialists. They are regular people who earn salaries, they have to pay EMIs, they have to take care of their children, and they're concerned about what the future of the country and their kids look like for the next 10 years. So today on DeKoder, with your rich experience, we aim to decode one simple question. What will India's next 10 years mean for the ordinary citizens in growth, inflation and savings? Thank you so very much for joining us.
Let me first say that macroeconomists are also normal people.
Fair enough. We'll debate this after the show gets over. Okay, so I have to begin with a question that baffles a lot of us. We hear many different views on India's growth. Some say 6 to 6.5% is not good enough for generating jobs. Some say that we need 8% minimum growth. Some even question the GDP numbers. I just want to understand from you, somebody who has studied India's growth for decades, how would you describe India's current growth in simple words?
So, I think it's important to first understand that for the last 35 years or so, since the early 1990s, we have had an average of around 6.5% growth. There was a much higher growth in the 2000s, around 2002 to 10 or thereabouts. And the rest of the time has been more like 6.5%. In fact, a little lower in the 1990s. So the average has been 6.5. So I would say that looking ahead for the next 10 years, 15 years, 10 years or so, if we are to achieve higher than this kind of 6.5% growth, it will require much greater effort. It won't happen by itself.
Does that also mean that you think that we need an 8% growth to really catapult ourselves? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, I think among the main challenges or issues facing us is the employment challenge. It'll be a burden if these people who are getting into the working age groups do not get adequate employment. It'll be a big dividend if we generate enough jobs. So I think that for the common person, for all of us, what is most important is the generation of what you might call quality jobs.
Okay.
Which are clearly scarce, relatively speaking, given the kind of demand for them in the country. One of the very positive things that has happened in the last 25 years is the amazing expansion of education at all levels. When only about 8% of the relevant age group went into higher education, now it's become almost like 30%. So that's a huge increase in percentage, what we call the gross enrollment ratio of people going into tertiary or higher education. In numbers, we are graduating around 10 million graduates a year. So that's very good for us for the future, in the sense that you are building human capital who can service the economy, who can serve the economy, who can be productive given the education. Now, of course, I'm aware that there are huge quality variances in different kinds of graduates in the country. But it does mean that people have some, relative to 25 years ago.
No,
it's
sure.
a huge number. Let me just, another very important point is that women's participation in education is now slightly over 50%. So that there are more women graduating from college than men now. So this is all very good for the country. However, this is from the supply side.
Absolutely.
Okay. The problem is there isn't enough demand.
Absolutely.
And so to generate much higher growth, we have to generate much greater demand for employment.
The common man can ask that whether the country grows at 6.5%, whether these numbers are even legitimate or not, whether they grow at 8%, how does it change my daily life? So if I was to ask you, what does it mean for the common man? Does it mean more jobs, faster payments? Does it mean better public services? Does it mean more opportunities? What does it really mean? What does high GDP mean for the common man?
I think that if one observes conditions all around us, whether it's in the metropolitan cities or smaller cities and towns and so on, that what is very clear is that the consumption levels of everyone has gone up. Now,
Correct.
It may not be as much as we would like. It may not be as well distributed as we would like. Second, transportation. And here is both good and bad in the sense that the number of vehicles being produced and bought, it continues to rise. There was a slump for some time. Now it seems to rise again. But the bad part of it is that in some sense it will be better for many of our lives if we don't need to have as much of personal transportation. But I think that in terms of policy, this is relevant to the question you're asking, that we seem to be mesmerized by showcase projects like metros, high-speed trains, flyovers, etc. Now, what is much more important is that people have much better access to good quality and frequent transportation. So in urban areas, for example, you can easily have far more frequent bus services where you just walk out of your house wherever you live, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes walk, and get a bus. It's not possible to do that with metro services because they can only be at some distance. Okay, so that's just one example in the sense that, look, there's something that we can do with the current income levels and increasing income levels to improve the livelihoods of people. Almost everyone now, or most people now, have access to television, a lot of entertainment. Now, just about everyone has a cell phone.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think if one thinks of people's livelihoods, look, to give you a cell phone example, when I first came back to India from the World Bank in end of 1980, I was in the Planning Commission for 3 years as a senior consultant, although I wasn't senior at all. I was a young man of 32. But because I was not an official, I was not on regular roles, I could not get a phone at home.
Okay.
Because at that time, to get a phone at home, you had to wait 7-8 years.
Right.
Okay. I was only here for 3 years. Only 3 years in my life from the age of 0 till now. 3 years I did not have a phone. I'm mentioning this now purely in terms of, now it's it seems very strange. Everyone has a cell phone. You communicate with your home. You transfer money, even the poorest or the less, I can't say the poorest, I suppose the poorest have no money to transfer. But you pay with your phone when you're buying vegetables, all the rest of it, which we all know. So I think that we need to understand that many of life's conveniences come with economic growth, and many more people will have access to that if they have incomes.
So essentially, the higher GDP would have to translate into everything, including the holy trinity of infrastructure, healthcare.
Exactly.
And that has to be accessible not only to, say, you and me, but
Yes.
even to the
Absolutely.
bottom 10 to 15% or perhaps even more. And that's what a higher GDP would
Yes,
translate.
yes.
Would that be the right
Absolutely.
interpretation?
And so one thing in which we have not done well, right from independence, now more than 75 years, are health and education services. So I don't think I'm wrong in saying that we're about the most privatized country in health and education. even the most capitalist country in the world, that is the United States, education is free and accessible to everyone till secondary school, end of secondary school, till class 12. Okay?
Right.
For everyone across the country. Yes, of course, there are differences in quality in schools from one area to another. We don't have that. In the case of health, Europe again has free health to everyone across the board. Of course, you pay through taxes
Of course.
or some other kind of levies. But what I'm saying is, today, in my view, among the biggest issues is very unequal access to education and health. I have better health access and treatment here than in the United States. Okay, so people like us have that,
Right.
but it's not true for majority of people. So I think that's one of the key issues. Is to do with access to the services that you have mentioned, that is education and health. That's what means a lot to everyone.
Now, finally seeing India actually achieve that goal that you've just spoken about. Is it because we don't have the required infrastructure and the logistics for it? Then is it because we have very weak manufacturing? Is it because that the decline is to be seen in household savings? Or is it because the state capacity and the governance is just not being able to keep up with this, holy trinity that we spoke about? What do you think it would be?
I think you've given all the answers, so there's not much left for me to say. But I would say that first, to achieve higher growth, it cannot be done without higher investment than we have at present.
Okay.
So currently our investment rate is around 30% of GDP, 30, 31, 32% or thereabouts. In our highest growth years in the 2000s, it had reached around 38% or so of GDP, as 8% more of GDP than now, by 2008 or thereabouts. And of course, correspondingly, savings had gone up. There were households with much higher financial savings. So this is a very key issue, that we cannot grow much faster than how we are growing today unless both our savings and investments go up. Now, in the case of savings, what seems to have been happening is that perhaps the income growth of a high proportion of households has not been going up as much as it should have, but they have been trying to keep up with their consumption aspirations, which has meant that they have been borrowing more.
Yes.
And so, ironically, the lower household financial savings could be a consequence of some success in providing better access to banking and loans to most people. So what it does mean is that it enables people to live in some sense beyond their means by borrowing to keep up their consumption levels. And that seems to have been happening.
So I think there is enough and more credible data to support exactly what you're saying in terms of the share of debt, household debt, and not including housing. That's now become a part of the GDP.
Yes.
And I think that is data that's coming out of RBI and deeply concerning and completely in alignment, in fact, with what you're saying.
Yes.
I just want to stick with household behavior, just with this track, and ask you that we are seeing two signals point the same way. One, that the net household financial savings fell to around 5% of GDP, and separate CSEP research points to a persistent slowdown in private consumption, which is also something you spoke about. Together, what do these tell us about the real financial health of Indian households right now? Are families cutting back on savings because they are cautious, or they are feeling stretched?
I don't know a clear answer to this, but my guess is that because they're feeling stretched, because if they were cautious, then they would save more actually. And this is a very good point of departure in the sense that two overall phenomena that are happening. One, of course, we know that longevity is increasing, life expectation is increasing. And therefore, all of us expect to live much longer. Therefore, you need to have more savings at an individual or household level for your old age. Aggregate that, it means higher savings, not lower savings.
Correct.
Okay, so you have to save for your old age. Second, with urbanization and the reduction in the number of households which are joint families, that you also need to save more because you won't have a joint family to look after you. The declining joint families, you actually need more savings. And so in some sense, now there's another side to it, that what kind of savings? These have to be long-term savings. How do you do long-term savings? Through pension funds, contributing to your pension, provident funds, life insurance, etc. And these are exactly the kind of funds which can invest in longer-term infrastructure lending.
Absolutely.
Which then makes also our lives better through infrastructure. So I'm just trying to
Connect the dots,
all right? That from the household level, I ought to have the opportunity and awareness to save more so that I don't become a burden to my family at the family level and a burden to society at the societal level in my old age. And so I think that among the policies, among the issues that need to be debated and thought-provoking is that how do we, A, make people aware of this? How do we provide instruments which are easy to understand and access so that I have assurance that I'm saving now and I'll be okay in my old age?
It's a little bit of a segue, my next question, Dr. Mohan, because you spoke about savings, which is directly linked to earnings and income. And a short while back, you also spoke about the importance of manufacturing. I'm going to tie all this in and also bring in China. If you were to kind of give me a similarity or something that China has done that we could potentially emulate, or is it even a fair comparison? A lot of people say that you cannot compare India with China, you can't compare the rest of the world with China. They seem to be on their own. So I just wanted your viewpoint on how do we see that?
I'm not one of those who feels that there's something very different about China.
Okay.
Of course they're doing very well. Of course they are the powerhouse of manufacturing in the world. But that didn't happen by a miracle.
Okay.
Right? So one of the things, one general impression that I would like to correct is that we say they're into manufacturing, we are into services. Fact of the matter is that the share of services in their GDP is slightly higher than ours. Share of services in GDP, right? And of course the share of manufacturing is higher than ours, both in terms of GDP and employment.
Okay.
Okay. The difference is that now there are only about 7% of GDP that comes from agriculture and only 15, 18, 20% of something of that order in terms of employment from agriculture. We still have 46%. That is the key difference, that we haven't gone through the kind of structural change that is needed for faster growth and for development. So mainly because we have not generated enough manufacturing jobs, particularly labor-intensive jobs. Now, this is something I've been concerned with for a very long time. When we worked on the industrial policy reforms in the early 1990s, one of our assumptions was that once we removed the controls, once we let the private sector free, once we liberalized trade, FDI and everything else, that natural comparative advantage. That is to say, what are we strong? We have many people where I started from, and low wages.
Absolutely.
Okay, so our wages are perhaps a third or something of China. They're lower than Vietnam. So there is no reason why we cannot be competitive. The reason may be that because of our education and health policies, we haven't had competent enough people in the past to do the quality manufacturing that you need. But that's not the case today. All right. So there is an issue to do with manufacturing. I don't quite frankly understand why our entrepreneurs do not invest adequately in labor-intensive activities. There's some things that I can guess. One is that for labor-intensive activities, they really have to be based, manufacturing that is, they have to be based around towns and cities. Because by definition, if you have a large factory with 1,000 workers, 10,000 workers, 5,000 workers, etc., it itself becomes a town or a city.
Absolutely.
Second, that for an active labor market, that is, if I want flexibility in the labor market, where it's easy for me to hire people and also perhaps to lay off people. That will work if they have other choices also. In other words, if I'm running a factory, I have to lay some people off, he doesn't protest very much or she doesn't protest very much because they can go off and get another job.
Correct.
What that means is that you have to have manufacturing of labor-intensive industries around towns and cities. All right? And what does it also mean? You have to have adequate housing, you have adequate transportation, and everything else that goes. The same thing comes back. All right? So I think these are some of the issues that confront us. In terms of China, one interesting thing I found in terms of manufacturing, which happened sort of by chance or by the people, state governments were, their provinces, they're called, were forced to do it, that in the time of the transition from the communist rule to the current rule, perhaps it's still communist, but not really, the central government was very short of resources, financial resources.
Okay.
So the provincial governments couldn't get much development from them.
Okay.
So they had to find their own ways and means of raising money. What they chanced upon or figured out or thought about, which they exercised, was because of their history, they had huge control over land. So they would give land almost free to large manufacturing enterprises, but make a lot of money from residential and commercial development, which therefore they could afford to give land much cheaper. That's a key problem that we have. That it's difficult for manufacturing to locate in and around cities because the land prices are too high, land values are too high, and therefore it's difficult for firms to do that. Now, that's my guess. I have not tested it properly. Okay.
Fair enough. How much time do we have to reach where China is? And maybe again, you can tell me that China is not the benchmark, but whatever that benchmark might be. But for a country, do we have a time limit? Is it a ticking clock at all?
No,
or
I wouldn't say ticking clock. You can't have a time limit in some sense. But the one way I would put it is that about the best that we could do, all right, is around 7% annual growth in per capita income.
Per capita
income. What does that mean? It's a very good thing to always remember, very simple thing.
Okay.
If anything grows at 7%, it doubles in 10 years.
Yes.
If anything grows at 10%, it doubles in 7 years.
Right.
That's a very convenient thing. Now, in the case of China, they managed to grow at 10% for something like 30 years. Okay. So, if you work that out, right, 30 years, 7 times 4, right, just about. So, you've had 4 doublings.
Exponential growth 4 times.
So, that you've doubled 4 times.
Absolutely.
So, 2, 4, 8, 16. Right? If you grow at 7%, which is good, 30 years, you have 3 doublings. 2, 4, 8. See the difference
I can
the
understand.
compounding makes. Now, I don't think that it's feasible for us to grow at those 10% rates. We're doing quite well if we grow at about 7% per capita, which would mean around 8% GDP growth. Just to translate all as you asked for translation, what does that mean? That the per capita income is growing, doubling every 10 years.
And
that's what we should be. Make sure we do that, not think what anyone else is doing. Now you talk manufacturing. One thing we've not been doing is concentrating on exports. So again, the puzzle for me that in the 2000s we did very well in exports. Our growth rate in manufactured exports was higher than that of China. Not the level, but the growth rate. Okay, obviously nowhere near the level. So my point there is, therefore, it's feasible for us to do that. An additional point I would make there as far as exports are concerned, Southeast Asian countries, the usual suspects, Taiwan, Korea, etc., East Asian, Southeast Asian, Thailand, Vietnam, and so on, have gained a great deal by exporting manufactured goods, mostly consumer goods and electronic goods, to the West, that is Europe and the US, Europe and North America. Now that window is not as available to us now. What is available to us is the Eastern window. That is to say, if you take East Asia, South Asia, that means ASEAN, plus China, plus Japan, plus Korea, plus South Asia, that is India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc. If you put all of them together, total population around 4 billion people, a bit more actually, all put together, a little more. Right? Now, a per capita average income is around $4,000 or $5,000. We are the lower end. What $4,000 or $5,000? Sri Lanka, by the way, just crossed 5,000.
Oh.
Just crossed 5,000.
So Sri Lanka's per capita
income is 1.6 times ours.
Is 1.6 times ours.
Yes. Okay. I just read it yesterday. Just crossed 5,000. So the point I'm making is 4 billion people on average, even if they grow at 4% a year, I'm doing conservative view, as opposed to earlier 7%. It's a huge expanding market. These are people coming from relatively middle income levels higher, huge market for all consumer goods. And since I've lived in the US and visited the US, I often take, the way I talk about this is, I'm talking about all kinds of goods that you buy in Walmart, one biggest department store chain in the US. When I was living there, I used to go to Walmart not to buy anything, but to do my research. I would turn over every product and see where was it manufactured. Okay, and basically almost everything, huge proportion of that stuff is imported from Asia. So what I'm trying to say is that you'll have Walmarts in Asia, Indonesia. The Prime Minister just went to Indonesia.
Yes.
He went to Korea earlier. I'm very glad that he's doing these visits, and I hope that indicates some change in policy. We've been concentrating on doing FTAs, trade pacts with the EU, with the US we are trying, UK we have done, and so on, which is very good. It shows that we have some confidence now in being more open traders. But we should do much more in the East. I believe we should go back to signing RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which includes almost all Asian nations, including China, or CPTPP, which is whose full name I always forget. That includes most Asian nations, but not China. The point be, look, we are importing about $140 billion of goods, 140, 150 from China, about 140. We don't export much more than 20. We export only about 5 billion to each of Korea and Japan, and we import much more from them, like 20. So what I'm saying is that the volumes of our exports to the whole of this very large region, which is continuing to grow at reasonable rates, is huge potential. A private sector people have to go out there and look, what can we sell you?
But a lot of the advantages for selling to the US and the UK and to Europe came from the fact that we had cheap labor. And that advantage sadly would not resonate with the...
It does, because we're much cheaper in all these countries.
Okay.
Our self-image is that we are big people, you know. But our wages, look, the average manufacturing wage is 15,000 rupees a month, the average. Less than what a good gig worker earns. Again, this goes both ways. If you pay only 15,000 rupees a month, worker cannot live on that anymore, certainly in a city. Therefore, we also have in our manufacturing practices, we have a very high proportion of workers who are contract workers.
Correct.
It's partly because of our labor laws. But what is the implication of that? If you have contract workers, you don't want to train them. So you don't go up the value chain. Right? It's only if you have workers who are with you for a long period of time, longish period of time, that you will then invest in training them and upgrading their quality. That's what China has done. Why do all the best products come from there now? It used to be, we talk China, oh, that's a cheap product. No good.
Dr. Mohan, I haven't even touched upon AI as yet. And I'm almost scared to do that, because in this entire sort of mismatch of, manufacturing, export, the impetus of, this particular part of the globe and the contribution that this will have in the overall scheme of things over the years, I shudder to even think that if there is a technology wave coming in the form of AI, and we are, even as being a part of, this particular part of the globe, we may be a part of the wave somehow, but it doesn't seem like we have the nuts and the bolts or parts of it to really be in the reckoning in this AI race. So I even shudder to ask you this question of, where would that be?
I have a much broader view of AI.
Okay.
More in the historical sense.
Okay.
That 200 years ago, you didn't have cars. You didn't have the internal combustion engine. Okay? All kinds of technologies that we have today were just not there 200 years ago. Majority of the world, most people work in agriculture. Because of huge productivity increases, now in the developed world, you don't have more than 5 or 6% people working in agriculture. So the world has adjusted every time. There's been a big technological change. So I'm not at all saying the big thing is not happening. Of course AI is happening. And of course big change. But this is not the first time there's a technological change. Now people say, look, this is much faster than ever before. That may be true. But I would still say, look, AI is not going to manufacture your table. Yes, what is true is there will be machines that will be more automated. But within industry, right, say textiles, footwear, clothing, furniture, everything used in the house, you can go through the whole list. In each of those, the technology used today and in the future is different from 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It needs fewer people today, right? But there's a difference still, that there'll always be a range of labor intensity in different products. What I'm saying is these things are changing all the time. You go to a garment factory in Bangladesh, which I have, right? So they're using the best machines, but there are thousands of people employed. So I'm not at all discounting the AI issue.
Right.
Of course it will have an impact, but there will be societies change. Also, for example, in offices. In the government, I used to have 2 typists, both of whom took shorthand, 2 or 3 other people doing other office stuff. Now, no one takes dictation.
Those days are gone.
Those days are gone, right? And we have gone through that change in all over the world. You don't have secretaries now.
Right.
Yes, there will be significant changes, but it doesn't bother me.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think the world is adaptive and we tend to get more fearful about change, but we always seem to come around it. Finally, Dr. Mohan, if there was a young person sitting today with you,
like you,
I was just going to say that I'm not young, but if there was somebody younger than me sitting with you, and they wanted your piece of advice on how they should think about their future in India in the next 20 years, say a fresh graduate of sorts. What's the one piece of advice that you would give them for the next 20 years, not next year?
The main piece of advice I give when asked this question is non-advice.
No advice?
Non-advice.
Oh, non-advice.
Which is that the situation today, despite all the problems, employment problems, etc., is that whatever you do, at least an educated person can get a living wage. You may not get exactly what you want. The advice I give is that you must decide what you are good at. And I think that there's enough dynamism in the country that you will do okay. Now, that may be too optimistic of you, but I think that if you just look around yourself, right, do you find anyone who is working hard at some skill and not doing as well as they should?
Well, Dr. Mohan, we can obviously not keep this, but there are dime a dozen people in restaurants who are masters in economics, just waiting tables because they're not.
Maybe they shouldn't have done economics.
Perhaps.
Yeah. So
perhaps.
What I'm saying is that everything requires a skill. You obviously don't want to have waiting at tables as a long-term employment career. Okay, but if you learn something by doing that, there's nothing wrong.
Fair enough.
And as I keep training yourself.
Upskill.
You might be waiting at tables. You understand how restaurants work. Then you can perhaps be managing the restaurant.
Sure.
But this is a very good point in that you will see huge, just within the last 20 years, huge expansion of restaurants and hotels in the country. That's going to continue apace for the foreseeable future.
Of course, it is optimistic, and we want this to be ending on an optimistic note. So, Dr. Mohan, that's very welcome. I feel that I will recap on what you said at the start and reiterated even somewhere in the middle, that the growth now has to be holistic and focused more to take people out of agriculture into more mainstream jobs.
Exactly.
And while the restaurants...
And manufacturing is very important.
Correct.
Particularly focused on exports.
Right.
And I don't agree with the export pessimists, because I think people are ignoring the huge market to the east of us. If you take Asia as a whole, that is ASEAN plus North Asia, China, Japan, etc., plus South Asia, more than 2/3 of incremental growth in GDP and trade will come from this region in the next 20 years. That's the important point.
This has been one of those conversations that honestly makes economics feel less like headlines and more like real life. So to everyone watching, growth, inflation, savings, these aren't just numbers on a dashboard for you. They decide whether your salary buys more or less next year, whether your EMI feels heavier, and whether your city works better or worse a decade from now. So if you now understand your household balance sheet better, or know what you have to do to make sure the next 20 years is flourishing, then do hit the subscribe button on this YouTube channel and watch out for our next show. Dr. Mohan, thank you very, very much. I could go on with this conversation, but I suppose we are strapped for time. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed myself, as you can see.
Okay, wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that.